You are going to die, not as a philosophical abstraction, not as a distant statistical certainty. You, the person reading this right now, with your specific memories and fears and unfinished business and people you have not yet called back, are going to stop. Your heart will stop. Your brain will stop. The electrical activity that produces whatever it is you call your consciousness will cease. And then what? That question is the oldest question in human history. It predates writing, it predates cities, it predates agriculture. Archaeologists have found burial sites dating back 300,000 years in which the dead were placed with tools and food and ochre pigment, evidence that even before Homo sapiens were fully Homo sapiens, something in the human brain refused to accept that death was simply ending. Something insisted on preparing the dead for what came next, even before anyone had agreed on what came next was. And here is the thing. After 300,000 years in every civilization that has ever existed, in every religion that has ever been practiced, and every philosopher who has ever thought seriously about the question, we still have not agreed, not even close. The 6 major living religious traditions give 6 answers that are not merely different in their details, they are different in their fundamental architecture, different in what they think the self is, different in what they think death does to the self, different in what they think happens in the moments immediately after death, in the hours and days that follow, and in whatever comes after that. They disagree about whether there is a judgment and who performs it. They disagree about whether the soul is immortal by nature or by gift. They disagree about whether you go somewhere or become something or dissolve into everything or return to try again. They disagree about whether what happens to you after death is determined by what you believed or what you did or who you were, or whether any of it was ever really up to you at all. And each of these traditions, when you examine them carefully, when you strip away the institutional overlay and the cultural packaging and the centuries of theological elaboration, turns out to be doing something more sophisticated than its critics give it credit for and more strange than its believers usually acknowledge. What happens the moment you die? 6 religions, 6 completely different answers. And the truth, if there is one, is somewhere in the conversation between them. Welcome to this channel where ancient secrets meet modern questions. Before we go into the 6 traditions, we need to establish something that most comparative religion discussions skip over because it changes everything that follows. The question of what happens when you die is not one question. It is at least 4 separate questions that different traditions answer differently and that are often confused with each other. The first question is, what happens to consciousness in the moment of death? Does it cease immediately? Does it persist? Does it transform? Is there a period of transition? The second question is, what happens to the self in the period immediately following death? Hours, days, weeks? Is there still something that can be called you? Is there an experience of that period? Is there a journey? The third question is, what determines the ultimate destination or outcome? Is it belief? Is it action? Is it merit accumulated over one or many lifetimes? Is it grace granted from outside? Is it the fundamental nature of the self that was always going to arrive at this outcome regardless of what you did? The fourth question is what the ultimate destination or outcome actually is. A place, a state, a dissolution, a return, a transformation into something that cannot be described in the language of a living person. Keep these 4 questions in your mind as we go through the 6 traditions, because you will see that different traditions are sometimes answering different questions and talking past each other, and sometimes answering the same question with answers so radically different that reconciliation seems impossible. Let us begin with Judaism, because it is the oldest of the Abrahamic traditions, and because its afterlife theology is the most surprising to most people who encounter it carefully for the first time. Here is what most people do not know about Judaism and death. The Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, has almost no developed afterlife theology. The dominant understanding in the earliest layers of the biblical text is that the dead go to Sheol, a shadowy underworld where everyone goes regardless of their righteousness, where God's presence does not reach, where the dead exist in a diminished, silent, non experiential state that is barely distinguishable from non existence. The Psalms say explicitly that the dead do not praise God. Ecclesiastes says that the dead know nothing. Job, in his most despairing moments, describes Sheol as a place of no return, where the dead lie in the dust. This is not what most people think of when they think of Jewish afterlife belief, and the reason they think differently is that Judaism changed dramatically and relatively late in its development. The encounter with Persian Zoroastrianism during the Babylonian exile, and then the apocalyptic crisis of the Maccabean period in the 2nd century BCE, introduced resurrection theology into Jewish thought. Daniel 12, one of the latest books in the Hebrew Bible, is the first clear statement of bodily resurrection in the Hebrew canon. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. By the time of Jesus, resurrection was a contested theological position within Judaism. The Pharisees believed in it, the Sadducees did not. The Essenes, whose library we found at Qumran, had their own complex eschatological vision. Judaism in the 1st century was not a monolithic institution with agreed afterlife theology. It was a vibrant, contested, pluralistic religious movement with multiple competing visions of what happened after death. What emerged from that period and developed through the rabbinic tradition is a theology that most modern Jews and most non-Jews thinking about Judaism would find surprising in its complexity. Classical rabbinic Judaism does affirm resurrection of the dead, Techiyat Hameitim, as one of its central principles. Maimonides listed it as one of the 13 fundamental principles of Jewish faith. But the rabbinic tradition also developed a rich and complex intermediate state theology. There is Gehinnom, named after the Valley of Hinnom outside Jerusalem, which in rabbinic thought is a place of purification after death, not eternal punishment. The dominant view in the Talmud is that Gehinnom lasts a maximum of 12 months, after which even the wicked are either purified and ascend, or, in the case of the most terrible sinners, are destroyed. Eternal conscious torment is not the mainstream Jewish view. There is also the concept of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, as a realm of the righteous dead, a place of spiritual delight and study. The rabbis being the rabbis, study features prominently in their vision of paradise. And there is the concept of the world to come, Olam Haba, which is the ultimate destination after resurrection and final judgment, a transformed world in which the dead are restored to embodied life and the divine presence is fully manifest. What happens the moment you die in the Jewish framework? You go initially to a place of review and purification. You are not immediately in your final state. There is a process. The Kaddish prayer that mourners recite for 11 months after a death is traditionally understood as helping the soul through the process of Gehinnom, which lasts up to 12 months for the wicked. After that process, the soul rests in Gan Eden, awaiting the ultimate resurrection. The self persists. The journey is real. The destination is not fixed at the moment of death, but is determined by a process that takes time. Now, let us cross to Christianity, which shares the Jewish framework's basic architecture but has transformed it in ways that produce a very different experiential picture. The Christian answer to what happens the moment you die has, in fact, never been fully agreed upon within Christianity itself, and the internal debates are far more interesting than the official positions suggest. The dominant popular Christian understanding is something like this. At the moment of death, the soul separates from the body and goes immediately either to heaven, hell, or in the Catholic tradition, purgatory. The destination is determined by the state of the soul at the moment of death, specifically by faith in Christ and the forgiveness of sins. This is the picture that most people, Christian and non-Christian alike, carry in their heads when they think about Christian afterlife theology. But it is considerably more complicated than that. The New Testament does not present a single unified picture of what happens at death. Paul, in his letters, sometimes seems to suggest that the dead are in a state of sleep until the resurrection at the end of time. In 1 Thessalonians, he describes the dead in Christ as sleeping, and his account of the resurrection suggests that the dead are raised at a specific future moment rather than going immediately to their final destination. This is the position that theologians call soul sleep or psychopanichism, and it was held by various Christian thinkers throughout history, including at certain points Martin Luther. Other New Testament passages suggest immediate experience after death. Jesus tells the repentant thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise." The parable of the rich man and Lazarus describes both men as immediately conscious and in their respective states after death. 2 Corinthians has Paul expressing a desire to depart and be with Christ, which seems to imply immediate presence with Christ rather than a period of unconscious waiting. The Catholic tradition resolved this tension by developing the doctrine of purgatory, an intermediate state of purification for those who die in God's grace but are not yet fully purified. This is a sophisticated theological position that takes seriously both the immediate persistence of the soul after death and the need for a process of transformation before the soul is fully ready for the vision of God. The Second Council of Leon in 1274 and the Council of Florence in 1439 defined purgatory as an official Catholic doctrine. The Protestant reformers rejected it as unscriptural, which pushed Protestant theology back toward either soul sleep or immediate judgment with no intermediate state. The Eastern Orthodox tradition has its own nuanced position, affirming that the soul is conscious after death and experiences a foretaste of its ultimate destination, while insisting that the final state is not fixed until the Last Judgment. Orthodox theology is generally reluctant to make definitive statements about the specifics of the afterlife, preferring to hold the mystery open rather than systematizing it as thoroughly as Western theology has tended to do. And then there are the minority positions within Christianity that have never entirely disappeared. Universal reconciliation, the idea that all souls will eventually be saved, has defenders from Origen in the 3rd century to David Bentley Hart in the 21st. Annihilationism, the idea that the wicked simply cease to exist rather than suffering eternal torment, has been defended by thinkers as mainstream as John Stott. Conditional immortality, the idea that the soul is not naturally immortal but receives immortality as a gift through resurrection, has a significant scholarly following. What happens the moment you die in the Christian framework? It depends enormously on which Christian you ask. But the most broadly shared elements are these. The soul persists, consciousness continues, there is an experience of the self after death, and what that experience is depends on the relationship between the soul and God that was established during life. Now we turn to Islam, which has the most detailed, specific, and narratively rich account of the immediate post-death experience of any of the Abrahamic traditions, and which is almost entirely unknown to non-Muslims. In the Islamic understanding, death is not a sudden transition from one state to another. It is a process that begins before the final moment and continues for a significant period afterward. And the details of that process, drawn from the Quran and the vast literature of Hadith, the recorded sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, are extraordinary in their specificity. The process begins with the arrival of the angel of death, Azrael or Malak al-Maut, who comes to collect the soul at the moment God has appointed. This moment is fixed and cannot be advanced or delayed by a single breath. The Quran is insistent on this point. Every soul will taste death, and no soul can die except by God's permission at the appointed term. The Hadith literature describes in remarkable detail what happens next. For the righteous, the soul is drawn out gently, like a drop of water from a waterskin, and is met by angels of light who wrap it in fragrant shrouds. For the wicked, the soul is torn out roughly, like a skewer being pulled through wet wool, an image of such visceral horror that it has haunted Islamic imagination for 14 centuries. After the soul leaves the body, it is taken upward through the 7 heavens, and at each gate it is announced by its name and its deeds. If it is righteous, the gates open. If it is not, the gates are closed, and the soul is returned to the earth. And then begins what Islamic theology considers one of the most important and least understood phases of the afterlife, the questioning of the grave. After burial, two angels named Munkar and Nakir come to the deceased in the grave and ask three questions. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? Who is this man who is sent among you? The righteous answer correctly, their grave is expanded and illuminated, and they rest in a state of bliss until the resurrection. The wicked answer incorrectly or cannot answer, and their grave is compressed around them, and they experience a torment that continues until the day of judgment. This intermediate state, called the barzakh, meaning barrier or isthmus, is the Islamic equivalent of purgatory but with significant differences. It is not a place of purification. It is a place of waiting, and the experience of that waiting is a foretaste of the ultimate destination. The grave itself is described as either a garden from the gardens of paradise or a pit from the pits of hell, depending on the state of the soul. The detail and specificity of this Islamic account of the immediate post-death experience is striking when compared to the other Abrahamic traditions. Judaism and Christianity have intermediate state theologies, but the level of narrative and procedural detail in the Islamic sources is unmatched. The hour of death, the withdrawal of the soul, the journey upward, the questioning of the grave, the experience of the barzakh, all of this is laid out in the Hadith literature with a precision that suggests these were not abstract theological positions, but vivid experiential realities for the communities that transmitted them. What happens the moment you die in the Islamic framework? Angels come. Your soul is extracted from your body, gently or roughly, depending on your state. You are taken upward through the heavens. You are returned to your grave. You are questioned, and your experience from that moment until the day of resurrection is determined by how you answer. Now we make the largest leap of all, from the Abrahamic traditions to Hinduism, and the architecture of the afterlife changes so fundamentally that it requires a complete reorientation of how we are thinking about the question. In the Hindu framework, the question of what happens when you die cannot be answered without first answering the question of what you are. And the Hindu answer to what you are is radically different from the Abrahamic answer. In the Abrahamic traditions, you are a unique individual created by God at a specific moment with a specific identity that persists after death, and that will be either rewarded or punished based on how you lived your specific life. You are essentially yourself permanently and irrevocably. In the dominant Hindu framework, what you call yourself is a temporary configuration of matter and energy organized around something called the Atman, the individual soul or self. But the Atman is not ultimately separate from Brahman, the universal ground of being, the ultimate reality that underlies and permeates all existence. The Atman is, in the deepest sense, identical with Brahman. The experience of being a separate individual, what Hinduism calls the Maya, or illusion of separateness, is a kind of cosmic misperception that death does not automatically correct. This transforms the question of what happens when you die into something entirely different from what the Abrahamic traditions are asking. The question is not where do you go, but what do you realize? And the answer, according to the various schools of Hindu philosophy, depends on the level of spiritual realization you have achieved during your life. uh, for most people, most of the time, death is followed by a journey through what the Garuda Purana, one of the 18 major Puranas, and the primary Hindu text dealing with death and the afterlife, describes in extraordinary detail. The soul, called the preta or ghost in this liminal period, leaves the body and begins a journey that lasts approximately 1 year. During this time, the soul is still connected to its earthly identity and still experiences hunger, thirst, and the effects of its actions. The rituals performed by the family of the deceased, particularly the Shraddha ceremonies involving offerings of food and water, are understood as literally nourishing the soul during this journey. After the journey, the soul arrives before Yama, the Lord of Death, and his recorder Chitragupta, who has kept a perfect account of every action the soul performed during its lifetime. The soul is judged. Those who have accumulated good karma may experience various heavenly realms, Svarga, before returning to rebirth. Those who have accumulated bad karma may experience various hellish realms, Naraka, before returning to rebirth. But crucially, and this is the fundamental difference from the Abrahamic understanding, neither the heavenly realms nor the hellish realms are permanent. They are experiences that the soul passes through, consuming the karma that sent it there before returning to another life on earth. The goal, the ultimate liberation, is not heaven. It is moksha, liberation from the entire cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, the recognition of the Atman's identity with Brahman, the dissolution of the illusion of separateness, the return to the ground of being from which the illusion of individuality had temporarily emerged. This is not a destination, it is a recognition, and it cannot be reached by belief or by following rules. It can only be reached by a transformation of understanding so complete that the question of what happens when you die dissolves, because the self that was going to die was never ultimately real. What happens the moment you die in the Hindu framework? Your Atman leaves your body. You begin a journey through intermediate realms. You are judged by the weight of your karma. You experience either heavenly or hellish realms temporarily, and then you are reborn into another life, carrying the karma of all your previous lives to try again. Unless you have achieved moksha, in which case there is no you anymore to experience anything, and that is the point. Buddhism takes this framework and radicalizes it in a direction that many people find either profoundly liberating or deeply unsettling, depending on their starting point. The Buddha's most radical teaching, the one that distinguishes Buddhism most sharply from Hinduism despite their shared cultural context, is the doctrine of anatman, no self. In the Hindu framework, even though the individual self is ultimately identical with Brahman, there is still something called the Atman, a real self, that makes the journey and achieves or fails to achieve liberation. Buddhism denies that there is any such thing. What you call yourself is not a self, it is a process. A series of physical and mental events arising and passing away in dependence on conditions with no permanent, unchanging, substantial self underlying them. This creates a famous philosophical problem that Buddhist thinkers have argued about for 2.5 millennia. If there is no self, what is it that is reborn? If there is no Atman, what carries the karma from one life to the next? The Buddha himself is reported to have addressed this question with characteristic indirection. He said that asking what is reborn is asking the wrong question, like asking where a flame goes when it is blown out. The flame does not go anywhere. But if you bring another candle, the new flame arises in dependence on conditions, including the conditions created by the previous flame. It is not the same flame. It is not a different flame. The question assumes a framework that does not apply. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition has developed the most elaborate and detailed account of the post-death experience in any Buddhist school, and it is contained in the text known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or in Tibetan as the Bardo Thodol, which means liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. This text, attributed to Padmasambhava and discovered as a terma or hidden treasure text in the 14th century, is read aloud to the dying and recently dead to guide the consciousness through the intermediate state called the bardo. According to the Bardo Thodol, the moment of death is actually an extraordinary opportunity. At the moment of death, the ground luminosity, the clear light of reality itself, dawns in the consciousness. For a trained practitioner, this is the moment of liberation, the recognition of the nature of mind as it always was, clear and luminous and empty. If the consciousness recognizes the clear light and rests in it, liberation is achieved in that very moment. There is no rebirth. There is no journey. There is simply the recognition of what was always already the case. For those who do not recognize the clear light, the consciousness enters the bardo of Dharmata, where it experiences visions of peaceful and wrathful deities that are, the text explains, projections of the consciousness itself, expressions of its own nature. If the consciousness recognizes these as projections, liberation is, again, possible. If it is frightened and flees from them, the journey continues into the bardo of becoming, where the karmic winds carry the consciousness toward its next rebirth. The Bardo Total describes this process with a specificity and a psychological sophistication that continues to astonish Western readers who encounter it. The Jungian psychologist Carl Jung wrote a commentary on the first Western translation in 1927, in which he described it as one of the most remarkable texts he had ever encountered. Recognizing in its description of the post-death process a psychological map of extraordinary accuracy, whether or not one accepts its literal claims. What happens the moment you die in the Buddhist framework? The process of dissolution begins. The elements that constitute the body and mind disaggregate in a specific sequence. The clear light of awareness dawns. If you recognize it, liberation is immediate and complete. If you do not, the journey through the bardo begins, a journey shaped entirely by the karma of your actions and the habits of your mind, leading eventually to rebirth in one of the 6 realms of existence. The god realms, the realm of demigods, the human realm, the animal realm, the hungry ghost realm, or the hell realms. None of these is permanent. All of them are experiences arising in dependence on conditions. The goal is to wake up from the dream entirely. The 6th tradition we will examine is one that most Western audiences know almost nothing about, and that is, given its antiquity and its influence, one of the great oversights of popular religious education. That tradition is Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism, the religion founded by the prophet Zarathustra in ancient Persia, is almost certainly the tradition that has had the most influence on the afterlife theologies of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and yet it is the least known of the 6 traditions we are examining. It is also, arguably, the most elegant in its afterlife architecture. In the Zoroastrian understanding, the soul, called the Urvan, remains near the body for 3 days after death. During these 3 days, the soul reviews its life. Its thoughts, words, and deeds are weighed. On the dawn of the 4th day, the soul comes to the Chinvat Bridge, the bridge of the separator, which spans the abyss between this world and the next. Here is where the Zoroastrian afterlife does something distinctive. As the soul approaches the Shinvat Bridge, it is met by its own dana, which can be translated as conscience or the embodiment of its deeds. For the righteous, the dana appears as a beautiful young woman of incomparable loveliness who explains that she is the soul's own good thoughts, good words, and good deeds made visible. For the wicked, the dana appears as an ugly, aged, foul-smelling hag who is the embodiment of the soul's own evil thoughts, evil words, and evil deeds. This is a profound psychological insight dressed in mythological clothing. You do not meet God at the Shinvat Bridge, you meet yourself. You meet the sum total of who you have been, made visible and undeniable. The judgment is not external, it is the inevitable confrontation of the self with its own reality. For the righteous, the Chinvat Bridge is wide and easy to cross, and they proceed to the House of Song, the Zoroastrian paradise. For the wicked, the bridge narrows to a razor's edge, and the soul falls into the realm of Druj Damana, the House of the Lie, a realm of darkness, bad food, and weeping. But here, unlike in the Christian hell, the Zoroastrian afterlife has a cosmic endpoint. At the end of history, Ahura Mazda wins the cosmic conflict with Angra Mainyu. The principle of evil is destroyed, the dead are resurrected, and a final renovation of the world, the Frasho Coretti, purifies even the realm of the wicked. Everyone is ultimately saved. The House of the Lie is not eternal. It is a phase in a cosmic process that ends in universal redemption. This is the first fully developed universalism in the history of religion. It predates the Christian universalists by centuries, and it presents a picture of divine justice that is simultaneously uncompromising and ultimately merciful. Your deeds matter absolutely, the consequences are real and serious, but the ultimate trajectory of the cosmos is toward restoration, not permanent division. What happens the moment you die in the Zoroastrian framework? Your soul remains near your body for 3 days. Your life is reviewed. On the 4th day, you come to the Chinvat Bridge. You meet your own conscience made visible. You cross or you fall, depending on the weight of your deeds. And whatever realm you enter, you remain there until the end.